computer. Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Kamari Valentine. Thank you so much for joining my podcast. And today I am so excited to have my first podcast guest. I am very delighted to have my friend Aisling. Aisling, it is Aisling, right? Your proper
It's
name.
Aisling O'Connor, yes.
O'Connor. When I first met Aisling, I struggled with the Irish writing of Ash's name and mangled it so much. So Aisling simply told me to call her Ash. And now I feel hesitant about calling her anything else. But Aisling O'Connor is an amazing psychologist based in Ireland, and she is joining me today. So Aisling, thank you so much for joining me. And it's so amazing to have you on my show.
Thank you very much, Kamari, and it's very exciting to be the first person. Thank you.
And Aisling, do you want to fill people in on what you do? Like, I was amazed to see what you had done in these past 2 years, right? In establishing,
Yep. Yeah, so I
establishing
guess
connection.
I have a private practice in Ireland, in Sligo, in the northwest of Ireland, called Connections Child Psychology, which I guess I created about 2 years ago. Physically created it 2 years ago, but it would have been in my kind of mind and in my vision for a very long time. I've been working as a psychologist for a long, long time, and in Australia, and returned home with the I guess the goal was to open my own practice after working in many practices in Australia. So yeah, it was 2 years ago now, and that's up and running. And we have since taken on 2 new therapists. So we're so incredibly busy and grateful that we can help so many families. So yeah, it's going really well, Kamari. Thank you.
That's amazing, Ash. And one of our points of connection, one of our many points of connection, it felt like magic, was that you've actually visited New Zealand as well, right? In your travels?
Yes. Yes, quite a long time ago, before kids, when life was very, very different. It was probably about 15 years ago now. We traveled all around in a camper van, myself and my husband, for a month. It was amazing.
That's utterly
Amazing.
amazing, Ash. Now, another point of connection that we have is and part of how this discussion came about that ended up in a podcast was our shared passion for attachment, right?
Yeah.
And so I was very keen to hear about how attachment informs your work. As you know, it is the mirror through which I see adult interactions, but those interactions have their basis in childhood, the very little people and parents who you work with.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess, the neuroscience that we know all about now is showing us that those first 2 years are so crucial for a child's brain development, right? And so when I see kids in the clinic, and I obviously do parent intakes, would be the initial session, one of the main things that I'm trying to find out is, what was life like when mum was pregnant for those 9 months and for those first 2 years, when that brain development was so crucial? Okay, because we know it grows so fast in that period that it's really important to look at that. And we know so much now that the early attachments in particular, and environment and all those things, are really crucial to how a child, how their little brain develops. So a child who's had any attachment disruption or any really crucial traumas, or a medical trauma, a birth trauma, all of those kind of look like an attachment disruption, if we call it that. And we know that a child's brain who's had that exposure will develop very differently to a child who hasn't had that start. And that might look like a child who has an outlook on the world being a bit more scary than another child. So it's really important to me, like when someone comes to me and says, this is the presentation, like this is what's happening, I can very quickly pinpoint the period in time that something probably has occurred based on all the neuroscience that we know now. So it's crucial.
That's amazing, Ash. And to take a wee step back, so I always find it very strange when we talk about a child's attachment, right? We say, and a child's attachment is secure or insecure, anxious or ambivalent, but really, it almost has nothing to do with the child. sure, children have temperaments, but it is actually
Yes.
a function of the caretaker's warmth and sensitivity, lack of criticism towards this little child and the goodness of fit. Is that right?
Yes, it is a lot to do with that, and can be a lot to do with that. But I think it's we have to be really careful that we're not saying that, you know, it's a parent's or a caregiver's fault. Say, for
Mm-hmm.
example, if a child develops, you know, their brain develops a certain way, because it can be other things. It can be,
Totally.
you know, it can be to do with that birth trauma, or to do with, you know, if a child is sick or has to go into hospital. And also, I think I truly believe that every parent is doing their absolute best that they
Absolutely.
can with what they know and how they've been brought up. And so very often what I find is that, you know, if there is that attachment disruption through that relationship, it's very often because the caregiver themselves never had that modeling, never had that real warmth, you know, connected relationship. And so it's very difficult sometimes for them to know how to do it, or they're trying their best to do it, but maybe it's not as easy for them. So we're talking about intergenerational trauma in a
Mhm.
sense, aren't we? But I do, back to that point, I really do believe that everybody's doing the best they can, just like our parents did the best they could with what they knew, whereas we probably know more now, and we know different, maybe better ways of being with people and with each
That
other.
that's such an amazing and fantastic points, Ash. That's so cool. And I absolutely agree with you. That's right. And what I find astonishing is when people, even who have experienced neglect, um, adverse childhood and other adverse childhood events, they make a concentrated effort to try and parent differently.
Mm-hmm.
So, in my experience of doing assessments in prison and quite stark other places, you're right. People are very often, not everyone, but the vast majority of people, I think, are absolutely doing their best. And I think it is astonishing how they're doing that despite generational trauma.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, we are seeing a shift. I see a huge shift, even like, you know, I know how my parents did it, and I can see how many parents are trying to do it differently now.
Mm,
Like I see them every day, and there is a massive shift. And that's only because we've learned a lot more and we've done a lot more research, and it will continue to evolve that way. So it's a good thing, right? It's a really good
it's an
thing.
absolutely good thing. And
Mm.
it's amazing that it is something that we know more about.
Mm.
Um, Ash, I was interested. I feel like we've already even started talking about co-regulation. When we talked about your work, I felt like that was something you really emphasized.
Yeah. So I guess, you know, again, back to that crucial period, young kids, as you would know, you know, they don't know how to calm themselves. They
Mm,
don't know how to, if we say the word, regulate themselves. So a large part of my job, I feel like, is helping parents understand that. So very often we might hear from parents who, you know, might talk about how often their child is having like tantrums or kind of big meltdowns, and they don't know what to do about it. And what a lot of parents don't realize, as I didn't when I first became a parent, to be quite honest, you know, quite a while ago, but that realization that a young child really needs a
mm,
co-regulator. So
yeah.
really needs that parents, you know, what does that mean? It means sitting alongside them when they're the most dysregulated, the most distressed they can be, and not leaving them, and loving them unconditionally through it, and holding that space. So basically lending them your calm, you
Mhm.
know. So what happens is, unfortunately, as parents, we get triggered when our child, you know, isn't listening or is having a big meltdown, or if we're out somewhere in public, like happened to me this morning. I saw a poor lady with her little child, and her little child was just absolutely like, just completely dysregulated, screaming, crying. And the mom had two kids, and she was trying to calm one kid down. And I could see she was getting dysregulated, because that's what happens, especially when we're somewhere public, or if we're
Mhm.
tired, or, you know, if we're kind of a little bit empty. But it's really interesting for parents to try it out. If you can stay calm when a child isn't, you've got a much better chance of calming everything down in the house. than if you get upset and dysregulated, because the minute you get it dysregulated, the child goes to the next level.
And this is a hot topic in our household at the moment, is this question of dysregulation, right? And the amygdala hijacking the frontal lobe, okay, versus behavioral consequences and so on. And so, I don't know, my line is very much that that children don't have a choice when they're upset.
Correct.
That they're not choosing to be that way. They desperately want connection. They desperately want to do the right thing. And they're not choosing to get upset, but a whole number of things have built up, for example, and they're, we say, losing the plot.
Yeah, and it's really, there's more to this that I feel like is really important. A very young child, and in fact, every child, I suppose, has two crucial needs. Okay, the first need is attachment, because they cannot survive without that attachment caregiver. We can't survive as babies without someone else. And the second need is to be authentic. But what happens very, very often, sadly, and it would have happened to me as a child, and it would have happened to other, lots and lots of people, you trade your authenticity if there's any chance that the attachment will be severed. And what that means is, if I don't behave a certain way, I get in trouble. If I don't behave a certain way, I get sent to my room on my own. If I don't behave a certain way, I don't get whatever treat or whatever it is. But the idea that a caregiver would pull away and have conditions maybe around the relationship, or the fear that they'll be left alone, means a child will adapt and change who they really are to try to make sure that that attachment doesn't get severed. And that's where it gets dangerous.
I feel like that's real gold there. I remember when we've talked about this before and you said this, it's just, you've said it so beautifully. So I'm just going to repeat that, because I think people listening are really going to really appreciate that for children, there can be a trade-off of their authenticity. They'll give that up in the pursuit of making that attachment, which they need for their very survival. So during childhood, they might have been childhood and adolescence, there might have been all manner of these traits, giving up who they really were, their real feelings, their real inclinations, in the pursuit of that important relationship or relationships that they had.
Correct. Yeah, and we see it. We see it in school all the time. I talk to parents and teachers about many different clients, and they'll be like, "Oh my God, she's such a great girl at school," or "Oh, he's so wonderful. I never have to say boo to him. He just has his homework done every day, and he never says a word." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And when I explore it, the child is actually sitting there in fight or flight, freeze mode, potentially, if they're an anxious child, or, and the idea that they would get in trouble, or that the teacher wouldn't approve of them, is so frightening to them that they will do everything they can to make sure that doesn't happen. So it's not always a good thing when we talk about the good girl or the good boy. We have to be really mindful of that trade-in that we're talking about, the authenticity.
This reminds me of when people praise independence. Like when they say, "Oh, he's so independent," and I call it pseudo independence, where in essence what's happened is a child has learned that they cannot rely on the caregivers around them, that actually it's better to do things on their own. And that is, to my mind, not true independence. What they've learned is, actually, I don't trust others to meet my emotional needs. And that wound that happens, then I'll just check. Does that sound right to you, Ash?
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's exactly it. That can happen because, again, a lot of, just going back to the real life examples that I would hear is, they want to sleep in bed with me every night, or they keep coming in the middle of the night, and I don't want them to have this bad habit, and I don't want them to be dependent on me. And again, it's gone back to the only way they can become truly independent is through safety in relationship. And whatever that safety needs to be is what I encourage parents to do. Like, so if a child needs to get into bed with you and they're 9 years of age, let them get into bed, because there's a real need there. And until you meet that real need and the child feels safer in that relationship, or, you know, not that the relationship might be safe, but it just, it's the feeling of safety in relationship. Until that happens, the child's going to keep needing to do that. Whereas if we can let that codependency exist for a while until they feel safe, then they will become truly independent. But it's a bit confusing, especially when we've got all these silly books and silly things that people have been told to do differently.
And this behavioral punishment,
Yeah,
black and
yeah.
white kind of view.
But
So,
it's changing.
it is changing, I think.
Confident and hopeful it's changing.
What do you
Yeah.
reckon about how this work has influenced you as a parent? And I know that one of the things that you've been thinking a lot about is, for example, online safety. But maybe let me start more generally, and then I'm going to ask you about online safety.
Okay. Yeah. So it massively influenced me as a parent. So basically, my when my youngest child was born, there was some birth trauma, and he was taken away from me, and he was in NICU, you know, in that intensive care for 5 days. There was a lot of interventions and all of those things. So I know very kind of personally why and how what it looks like in a child later on in life. So what it's meant is that, where I'm so fortunate and so grateful that I have this knowledge, because I parent him very differently if I didn't know this. So when he has the big feelings, which he has the big feelings because of his early start, he's got a nervous system that's much more reactive based on his beginning. I'm able to see that for what it is. And so it's easier, not always. Obviously, I'm human too, and I don't always get it right, but I can definitely see how I can be more empathic and more patient with those big meltdowns. And I can understand what it's about, you know, like little things. Whereas for someone who wouldn't know this stuff, they would just see a child who's just, you know, trying to upset people in the house, or they're just never, they always want their own way, or they always want control. And do you know what I mean? So I'm so grateful that I know this stuff, because it's definitely meant we've had a calmer house than we possibly would have had.
Yeah. And
Sure.
and I like that you emphasize that this isn't easy. This isn't about a instant, you know, just because you know that doesn't mean, oh, everything like this is now easy. In fact, it's really difficult. It's difficult to regulate your own nervous system. Difficult to regulate somebody else's nervous system.
Yeah. And I always say, like, to everyone, that it's much harder to stay calm in the presence of a meltdown or whatever's happening in the house than it is to just shout and roar. Yeah. It takes so much more to hold it together and to keep yourself regulated. And it is so difficult. And I definitely do not do it all the time, because, again, like, I am human. And, you know, you'll notice as a parent, when you're tired, if you've had a late night, if you're a bit stressed with work, you're much quicker to maybe not stay regulated. So that's where I think parents' self-care has to come into this a lot. When we're talking about all these things, like, it's not just about the child, and, you know, you really do need to look after yourself, because it's not easy. Parenting is incredibly hard.
And regulating your feelings is not just a thing you get born with, right? It's a skill that you can practice at and improve.
Yeah. And I think the first part of that is very often recognizing when it's happening. Yeah. And when you can start to recognize when it's happening, you can start to learn how to pause. And I talk a lot about this intentional pause. And, you know, rather than just reacting to something, take 10 seconds, 5 seconds. For me, it's, Mommy just needs to get a glass of water. I'll be back in 1 minute. And I go and I walk and I get my glass of water, and I'm counting myself back down, and I'm calming myself, reminding myself that, you know, their age and why it's happening, and they're just hungry or they're just tired or whatever. And by the time I come back, hopefully I can have calmed, not always, but a lot of the time I'll have calmed myself right back down again. But it's that slowing down and recognizing when it starts to happen, when you're starting to get triggered. That's kind of the key to changing it, I guess.
And the active mirror neurons, so sorry,
Yeah.
the way mirror neurons work is actually both directional. So we're using, so our awareness, our calming down helps the child calm down. But as the child calms down, is regulated, we also calm down.
Yeah, for sure. Because works both ways. And even like that, if I walk away and get a glass of water and I come back and I might do big breath like that, like a calming breath, then that helps them. Or I might, like, especially with my youngest, my oldest, pick him up, and I've had times I've rocked him over and back. So he's so dysregulated that nothing is going to work. Only when I grab him in my arms with a big tight squeeze, like a hug, and I rock him over and back, he just instantly starts to calm. And the movement and the proximity and the connection. But it's important to mention too, not every child will want to be held. Not every child will want to be, want the movement. For some kids, they'll be on the floor and they won't want you anywhere near them. But it's okay to it's okay to sit outside their bedroom. It's okay to say, I'm right here whenever you need me. Those type of things. It will be different for every child.
Amazing, Ash. And I really like those very practical examples that you've given. I'm not sure exactly how to introduce this passion project you've been working on, because to me it's so connected to everything we've been talking about. Your passion for online safety, which you've been very unwavering about, to me is informed so much by everything we've talked about. How about I let you introduce what you're doing in the online space?
Yeah, so I guess since probably before, but definitely since I've had my children, I have been very aware of how different it is now with the online world, with phones, devices, with all of the risks that come with that. And so I have, I guess, kind of been creating a course and a program in the background. But to answer what you've just said about the connection here with what we're talking about, I believe, this is my belief on it, is that it is absolutely of paramount importance that we are connected and communicating with our child in order to keep them safe. And so to me, the connection and being approachable as a parent are two pillars, if you like, of that kind of safety, of how we're going to keep them safe. So when I say approachable, what I mean is that no matter what we do, no matter how much we educate them, no matter how much we educate ourselves and how great our relationship can be, there are probably still going to be times where they will make mistakes. And as they get older, especially I suppose in those teenage years when they're a bit more impulsive and friends are doing things and whatnot, there possibly will be mistakes made. And we need to make sure that we're the type of parent and we have that type of relationship with them where we are so approachable, so that should something go wrong, or I often say when something goes wrong, that they can come to us.
That's brilliant.
And this, Kamari, I think this starts like from birth.
Absolutely.
And that's not to frighten anyone who has a 13-year-old now and has done differently. You can always change it, but it's about being careful with those threats. It's about being careful with consequences. It's about like not threatening to take away devices. That's the biggest thing I talk about to parents in the clinic, is a child's greatest fear is that you're going to take away their device. And that's not just taking away a physical device. You're taking away the link to their friendships, which are so important to them. And so if you've threatened it many times, they're not going to come to you when they've got a problem or when something really bad is happening, because they're too scared. There's 3 reasons actually why what they're afraid of, why they don't come to parents or caregivers. The first reason is because they don't think parents are tech savvy. So they think they think you don't know anything about the online world, so how could you possibly help them? The second thing is they think that they're going to disappoint you. And there's that fear to attachment disruption again, right? They don't want to disappoint you. Even your teenager who mightn't have spoken to you for the last 6 months, they still don't want to disappoint you. And the third thing, the biggest one why they won't come to you when they're in trouble is because they think you're going to take away their device. And there's so much we can be doing from the start to try and think about these, big things that I always think that now, like when kids are really young for me, it's so incredibly hard, and it's a huge challenge nearly every day, obviously. But I'm always thinking in long term, what kind of a parent am I setting myself up to be right now for the rest of their life?
That's a really great reminder, like a really great statement. Ash, the other thing I like is that when you're talking about online safety, and I think this really shows your psychological awareness and your skills. You're not just talking about a to-do list, like put this password on, restrict these sites, like those are surface things, if you like, that aren't really about this context of creating safety, of actually meaningful, dare I say, meaningful safety.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when parents reach out to me for some support on the online stuff, they think I'm just going to give them a list of all the parental controls and you just put all those things on the phone and you're fine. Yeah. But it's not that. And exactly what you've said, the reason it's not that is we can wrap them up in our house and we can lock everything down and we can be 100% almost 100% sure, almost, if they haven't got a phone snuck away, but we can be almost sure that we can keep them safe. But what happens when they go to their friend's house? What happens when they're out in the schoolyard? And you know what one of the really frightening things is now, and I'm hearing it more and more, in primary school, so that early years, I'm not sure what you call it in New Zealand, but there are kids, there's so much exposure now to pornography that kids don't know what it is, and they can't make sense of it, and it's scary. So they come into school, in primary school, and they reenact things, trying to make sense of it. And so if you have a child who's come into school and done something to another child, and that other child hasn't been taught their early warning signs, or hasn't been taught the right to stay safe, or, good and bad secrets and all those things that we do to keep kids safe, then they don't know what to do with that. And so then they're left sitting with that on their own. And they don't know that they can reach out to a parent. And there's just so much to this. But it isn't about parental controls. It's about open communication and connection in your relationship, and starting as early as you can, whenever that is. It's never too late to start. It's not this huge thing that I think a lot of parents think that it is. It can actually be quite easy to, not easy, but it's very doable to do with the right tools and the right kind of guidance on it.
And Ash, I believe you've got a webinar coming up, right? This is a taster, if you will, of some of that wonderful knowledge that you have.
Yeah.
Give us the details of that webinar.
Yeah, so it's on Monday the 12th. It's 8:30 p.m. here, so I think that's probably what
8:30 p.m. I think is 9 p.m. our time.
A.m.
on Monday night. So Monday morning is our night. Monday night.
Yes. So it's my night time, so it'll be your morning time.
Okay.
So it's basically all of the things that you need to know to keep your child safe online. So I'm going to cover, it's an hour masterclass, but it will cover so much of this information about what you need to know. So for anyone that obviously is feeling that this is really overwhelming, and I know it does feel like that sometimes, but it doesn't have to be. So if they can, by all means, jump onto my Instagram and they can have a look there and register if they want.
And Ash, if people can't join live because of time differences or whatever, do you have a recording available?
Yes, correct. So anybody that registers obviously will get that recording afterwards as well.
And Ash, what's your on Instagram? Can you remind me? Are you Aisling O'Connor or are you Connections Psychology?
Connections Child Psychology on Facebook and on Instagram.
Brilliant. Ash, that is just utterly, utterly fantastic. You're so amazing. And I feel like this just adds just a beautiful dimension to this discussion about, um, you know, healing the wounds of childhood, perhaps even preventing the
Yeah.
wounds of childhood, right? That's amazing. And thank you
It's a,
so much for joining me all the way from Ireland. That's just utterly fantastic. So thank you so much for joining us, everyone who's been listening. We'd really love to hear what you think. Please spread the word. Ashling's webinar masterclass is coming up. And like Ashling said, you can also um, hear the recording even if you can't attend live. But I think if you can attend live, it would be a great chance to ask Ash some questions that might be burning on your mind. So please check that out, and we'll catch up with you soon.
Thank you.